Hi everyone. So occasionally I have to review a game and I feel torn about the best way to go about explaining it to you. And no more is that true for Carmageddon Reincarnation. Now, just to give you a little bit of background here. I have known the guys at Stainless Software for a fair number of years. I reviewed their original Carmageddon release and was shown it behind closed doors at ECTS 1997 or something. So I have a long history with this franchise. Now the guys at Stainless were very kind to give me a free copy of Carmageddon Reincarnation right the way back when they were in their early access. And we've been following development of the game for, well, the last year really. Now, you might remember when the beta was released, I made a number of comments as to where I thought this game was going to end up sitting, and in some respects I was warning the developers not to go down this route. Unfortunately, what they've delivered pretty much just says everything that I was saying in the beta. This game is not very well optimised, or should I say, less not well optimised as in badly designed. One of the biggest problems this game has is the frame rate, and there's no way to get away from this. The frame rate is trash. The gameplay is phenomenal. The graphics are substandard. And so what we have is a game that is quite confusing in some respects, and in my opinion needed another 6 months at least. Here's the issue. At the end of the day, the very first level you play in Carmageddon Reincarnation is the city level, where the frame rate averages under 40 frames a second. You might see 45 if you're lucky coming round some of the less intense corners, as it were, where there's not as many pedestrians. But the strange thing is that as you progress through the game, some of the levels actually have pretty good frame rates, 55 and above, occasionally even hitting 60. Now bearing in mind this is on a 770 GPU from Nvidia with a Core i7 4790 CPU. And 16 gig of RAM. This is no slouch. This plays GTA 5 beautifully at 60 frames a second. It plays Wolfenstein beautifully at 60 frames a second. It plays The Witcher at about 45 frames a second. There we go. But my point is really that it seems that when the developers have put this game together, it doesn't make sense. Why put the worst performing level right at the beginning, giving the worst possible impression of what the game is capable of? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, this is a game that is highly complex in its engine characteristics. When we look at the cars and the damage modelling that we have there, it is pretty stunning. When we kind of look at body parts flying off the pedestrians and so on, it's pretty impressive. But then everything else just falls apart around it. It hasn't created a fluid gaming experience at pretty much any graphics card on the market apart from Titans by the look of it. That and obviously the 980 high-end GPUs. It just doesn't provide that smooth gameplay that you need from a racer. As far as I'm concerned, if you're playing a racing game and it's not delivering 60 frames a second on PC, do not release it. And ultimately this is a racing game. Alright, there's also the wrecking mechanics and all the other aspects there, but ultimately this is about cars on tracks with stuff to race against and avoid and destroy and all of that. And so that 60 frames per second sweet spot on PC, you've got to be able to do that on at least mid-range hardware, in my personal opinion. But what we're talking about here is all the settings turned off, and it doesn't even deliver 50 frames a second. There's something tragically wrong with this game, I'm afraid. But let's talk about the actual gameplay itself, because the gameplay is really fun, but it's detracted from, obviously, that, well, awful frame rate. As a game, Carmageddon stands alone. It's unique in what it does. It aims to provide you with a playground of, well, full auto destruction is the best way I can put it. The idea of the pedestrians being something that you score points off for, obviously style bonuses for taking them out in particular ways, and the larger number you can take out at once, and so on. It's fun. It's no way a boring game. With the power-ups as well, they add a crazy amount of variety in the sense that you never know what you're going to get from one race to the next. Even replaying a race can give you a completely different outcome at the end. It's fun, and it does show that these kind of games can exist in the PC environment and can be popular. But you have to have an engine that works well, and here it isn't working well. When we look at multiplayer, I found multiplayer to be a disappointment, mostly because I could never actually get into a multiplayer match. Go to multiplayer, would you like to create a match? No, I wouldn't really, I'd like to browse and see what everyone else is doing. There are no games. And I think that speaks volumes for Carmageddon and how it's really been received by the community. Nobody's playing it multiplayer. Simple as that. There just isn't anyone around to play. It's a big shame, but ultimately, I think when we look at Carmageddon Reincarnation, we have to say it's a curiosity. It had all of the potential to be a groundbreaking hit all over again, but it's been released too soon. It hasn't been optimized properly enough, or the developers have taken the decision that this is a 30 frames per second targeted game and it is going to be released on consoles. And essentially the PC development side of things has been used to produce the console version of the game. Now, I said that during beta, and I'm actually sticking to that because it does strike me that this game feels more like a console title because of the way the effects are working and so on, because the frame rate constantly seems to want to push itself down to 30 frames a second. It just feels to me that this is a game that would be much more at home on PS4 and Xbox One. And on PC you just have to accept that unfortunately it's got an awful frame rate. That does impact the quality of the final result, and a lot of people just aren't playing it, so there's really nothing going on in multiplayer. I feel really sorry that I have to say this about a game and a company that I have so much respect for, but they should have done better. It should not have been released in this state, not considering nearly going back 4 months ago, it was still in this state. This is basically the same game we looked at in beta, with very little polish having been applied, in my opinion. Certainly not as far as that frame rate is concerned, and that is all important, I think.